Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. I finished a couple of books over the weekend, so I just want to go through that. I wanted to go through the books that I started to replace them, and also the books that I hope to start soon once I finish a couple of other books that I have on the shopping block, I guess. Uh, the first one that I finished was A Great and Terrible King, Edward the First and the Forging of Britain by Mark Morris. I first became interested in Edward the First years ago after I read, or even while I was reading, Alison Weir's book on Eleanor of Castile, who was the first wife of Edward the First. And probably if I would say he had one true love, that was her, because I don't think he had nearly the same attachment to his second wife. But yeah, so I first became interested in him because of that. This book also is an older book for me. I picked this up years ago, and I alternated between reading this book physically and listening to it via Audible. And I believe I either already owned the audiobook or it happened to be free through Audible, and I can't remember which. Eventually, I pretty much stopped listening to it and switched almost exclusively to reading it. And I'm glad that I finally started to read this, and I'm glad I happened to have the audiobook because I think that was what gave me the push. At first, the size of the text plus the size of the book had prevented me from starting this book in the past. So I think that having the audiobook to start was what I needed to really get the kick in the pants to start this. And I'm glad I did. I have enjoyed Mark Morris in the past. I think that the first book I read of his was his book on King John years and years ago. I think I have it downstairs, actually. I don't know that I've read any of his other works, but I enjoyed this just as much as I remember enjoying King John. So I would recommend this book. I came away knowing a lot more about the Wales, Scotland, even Ireland to a certain extent, relationship with England. And yeah, this book was very, very gripping at certain points where it was almost like I couldn't wait to see what would happen next. It was just really interesting. So yeah, definitely recommend. Part of it is Morris's writing style, part of it's just the materials that he's covering. There's a lot going on in Edward the First's life. Now, the other book that I finished was the second book that I finished was one that was on Kindle. It was, I always forget the title. I believe it's called Bede and the Theory of Everything. And this was a book by Michelle P. Brown. Yeah, Michelle P. Brown. I almost said Morris, which is why I had to glance to the side. Michelle P. Brown. This is the first book that I've read of hers that is not directly dealing with scribe and that kind of thing. I hadn't realized until I wrote my library catalog card for my book journal that I actually I'm currently reading another one when I started reading Bede and Theory of Everything. The other book that I'm reading is either called a resource book for scribes or something like that. I haven't read it recently, so the historical source book for scribes. So I got that back when I first started becoming interested in calligraphy, and I wanted to just not only look at a bunch of text styles, but I also styles of text, but I also wanted to look at the history of that sort of thing, which is when I first picked that up. Didn't realize when I picked up Beat in the Theory of Everything that it was by the same person. I absolutely loved this book. It was nice to connect to Bede from something outside of his ecclesiastical history, because his ecclesiastical history doesn't give a whole lot of insight into him. But Michelle P. Brown, I'm not sure why she insists on the initial, but anyway, she pulls in all these different sources as well as Bede's own work to give a nice rounded picture of Bede. And I really enjoyed getting to know him, getting to know his world, getting to know his influence on history, on some things just as simple as doing footnotes. Apparently he was very early in footnoting things, simply because he was being given a hard time for some of the things that he would write, and he wanted to prove that he wasn't just making stuff up, that he was pulling from older sources like Augustine, etc. So that he was very early in the use of footnoting. And I'm interested in seeing his footnoting in the commentary on the Acts of the Apostles that he has, or that he had done that I own. There. So I look forward to seeing those footnotes, his style of footnoting, when I continue reading that book. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. He was just very influential in various different areas. That's the first other non-history oriented area that I can think of, although he apparently played his part in helping settle that whole issue of when the Easter was supposed to be, so that way the whole church could be united on that. So he played his part in that. Just, yeah, he had a lot of influence. There's a reason that he became declared a doctor of the church after his death. There was great demand for his works, even within a couple of years after his death. There were people like, who are some of the people who really made sure that they had his works? I know St. Boniface was one. There were just a whole, his works were so popular that they kind of became almost like bestsellers not long after his death, which is why there have been so many copies of his works available for scholars to reference and to translate. Not all of the works available by Bede have at this point been translated into English, because he wrote in Latin. Apparently a very pristine, not elevated, just a very pure Latin, for lack of a better term, because it wasn't used in conversation in the same way that it would have been in Rome. So it was just not affected in the way that it would be if you were using it constantly. It hadn't mutated, for lack of a better term. So his was a very pure Latin in his writings. But regardless, most of his writings, all of his writings were written initially in Latin pretty much, except for the last work that he did before he died, or one of the last works that he did before he died, which was a translating of the Gospel of John into the vernacular, so into English. or at least the English of his day. But yeah, so I'm not sure where I was going with that, but regardless, thoroughly enjoyed Bede and the Theory of Everything. Would definitely recommend it if you're interested in Bede, if you're interested in the history of some of the manuscripts at the time, and in just monastic life at that time period. Just if you're interested in that era and just all the little things that could branch off in regards to Bede, so that would include, like I said, manuscripts, monastic life, church issues, those kind of things, then if you're interested in those areas, that this book would be very interesting to you. And her style is very interesting, but also definitely very learned. I wouldn't consider her like, there's certain historical writers who are definitely aimed more at a general audience. She doesn't aim her books are more for an audience that is more, I wouldn't say just a scholarly audience, but you'll see in the comments of books on Amazon where they'll complain about it being a book being too dry or whatever, or too scholarly. A lot of times I actually then gravitate towards that book, because in my head that a lot of times means that those are the books that are not just meant for the general population. They tend to be a little bit more, have a little bit more meat to them, and in my mind to be a little bit more reliable. So that's where she falls in. She's got an easy to read style, but she is in that scholarly area where, if you're interested, I think you'll find her easy to read. But if you are a casual reader, she might not be for you. Now, going on again with Michelle P. Brown, this is Anglo-Saxon manuscripts, and even more so for this book than for Bede and the Theory of Everything. This is definitely meant more for scholarly audience, or meant for readers who are a little bit more focused in their interests. My biggest complaint about this book is the fact that you're flipping back and forth a lot. What she has is she'll have her pictures numbered and with a little bit of information about each one, but she'll reference throughout the book the different pictures, and so to see what she's talking about, you're constantly flipping back and forth. So that's my biggest complaint about this. Now, I got to the point eventually where I'd recognize some of the numbers and be like, oh, I remember that book. And sometimes I found that when she would reference a particular picture, if it was in regards to a certain book, like the Book of Kells or something like that, sometimes it wasn't even a picture that directly related to what she was talking about. It might just be the cover or one of the pages from the book that wasn't really having anything to do with the topic at hand. So, for example, in one of the parts, she talks about the way that some early punctuation. Oh, I need to pull this bookmark out. Look, I found these little medieval art bookmarks. So this is one of the weird cats to it. And that was marking this book. But she was talking about an early form of punctuation that one of the books used. And let's see. And she was saying that a certain kind of book, and I can't find which one it is, uh, one of the books, or one of the styles, yeah, I can't find, at different punctuation points, there would be these little creatures. She's described them as being looking almost like brontosauruses. But the one way that they describe them, and I wish I could find the description of them, I believe they're like what were they called? It was like pretentious worms, or darn it. If I find it, I'll mention it. But what was annoying about it was she mentioned this kind of cool thing, and then when I moved to the picture that she had numbered, it wasn't in that example. It just what took me to the picture she happened to have of the book, but it didn't have my worms on it that I wanted to see. And I haven't been able to find them when I Googled them, so it's kind of disappointing because I wanted to see what she was talking about. So, I mean, that's probably the only annoyance about this book. I don't like this quite as much as I did Beat in Theory of Everything, but I do think that had a lot to do with the flipping back and forth. Sorry, I couldn't help but continue to look because it was really bothering me. So, that was talking about in the book of Cerne, Cerne, a Mercian book, circa 820 to 840, were considered to be, okay, so they were decorative, meant to distinguish two separate parts of text occurring on the same line, so early punctuation, and they were a menagerie of brontosaurus-like creatures described as pretentious worms, which would be these little separating kind of punctuation type creatures. And I've never been able to find any text with these pictures, with these pretentious worms on there. And disappointingly, the picture that she has you go back to just as a picture of the book of Cerne or Cerne, or however it's pronounced. Either a different page within it that didn't have the worms on it, or the cover, one of the two. So it was a little disappointing in that way. But other than all the flipping around, this is an interesting book. It's almost like a miniature of the other book that I'm reading of hers, the historical source book for scribes, but that one has more in the way of details in the script, on the scripts in particular. It even has strokes for making each of the letters and stuff at certain points. So this one isn't quite as detailed in that area. So it does cover slightly different. It comes at the manuscripts from a different angle. So those are the books that I've finished. I know I rambled a little bit with that. I might have to edit it down a little bit. Partially because I couldn't bring myself to stop looking for the pretentious worms. Now, I'm currently reading and listening to. I started out listening to it via Libby. The book is called The House of Beaufort, and I have been enjoying listening to it, but it's kind of felt like slow going with just listening to it. I usually do best if I'm listening and reading to a book if I'm going to listen to it, just because I do tend to absorb better when I'm reading, looking at it versus listening. So I am now reading it on Kindle as well, which I feel like I'm making more progress that way. But I started thinking about the next book I want to start to replace that, just because I kind of want to have another biography type book. Not quite as general as some of the other books that I'm reading. I want to kind of more focus on specific historical figures versus the more general thing on manuscripts or like medicine or anything like that, just to sort of balance out the more general things that I've been reading. So I've been looking at replacements for when I'm done with the House of Beaufort. And one of them has been the Royal Tragedy, The Brothers York by Thomas Penn. But it's occurred to me while I'm listening / reading to the House of Beaufort that there's going to be a lot of crossover because I'm headed into War of Roses. I'm very close to getting to the War of the Roses now. And this is going to be really getting into that as well. So I have a feeling this might not be the best choice after having done the House of Beaufort. Then I also thought of Richard I by John Gillingham, or Eleanor of Aquitaine and Four Kings by Amy Kelly. It would be one or the other, not both. Now, I also ended up covering some of this fairly recently with The Greatest Nights about William Marshall. So I feel like I've really hit this one fairly recently as well, this particular era. And I feel like this might actually be a little bit of repetition. Now, one that might not seem as much of a repetition, even though this is around the time of Edward Longshanks, this is covering, I believe, his daughters. So, Daughters of Chivalry, Forgotten Princesses of King Edward Longshanks. So this will hit some of the era, even though it's the same time period of Edward I, it's going to hit a slightly different point of view, which could make it feel less repetitive because I doubt it'll cover as much the wars that were going on at the time that he was really deeply involved in. So this is an option. But possibly more attractive is a book that I've owned on Kindle for a while about Roger Mortimer. It's called, I want to say, The Greatest Trader, and it's by Ian Mortimer. I believe that's the name of the author, Ian Mortimer. I remember being very disappointed, or I was recently very disappointed when someone informed me on YouTube that the author is not related to Roger Mortimer, which is sad because it'd be fun if he was related. But oh well, it's just a coincidence that they share a last name. So I might actually read that one because although a Roger Mortimer has popped up in different books because it was a name that seemed to run through the family, I haven't read recently a book on that Roger Mortimer. I actually haven't read a book focused on that particular Roger Mortimer at all. I first read a book with him in it many years ago, or maybe not many, years ago, when I read, again, another Alison Weir book. I think it was Alison Weir. On what's her name? Eleanor as well? The She-Wolf of France was the name of the book. And I want to say her name was Eleanor as well, although I can't remember for sure. But regardless, when I read a book about her, he came up in that. So she was the wife of Edward I's son. But yeah. So I first became interested in him during that. I think I might start that one after I finish with the House of Beaufort. Actually, that I could even do that concurrently because they aren't really going to have any crossover. So I might do that. And finally, the other books that I started after I finished Bede and then after I finished Anglo-Saxon manuscripts. I started this one after doing Bede and Theory of Everything after I finished that. Marking the Hours, English People and Their Prayers. And this is going to be interesting. The author mentioned that when, I think this is a he, Amon, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Eamon. It's an Irish name, I think. And I'm not sure if that's a guy's name or a girl's name. I think it's a guy's name. Yes, it's a guy's name. So, he talks at the beginning of the book about how when he would ask for the pages with different kinds of writings on it, so like people would write like some of their thoughts down, prayer intentions, family trees, those sort of things. We'd ask from different librarians for those pages. He would get confused emails back saying like, "Are you sure you didn't actually want this page? You know, the ones with the pretty pictures kind of thing." And he's like, no, I want the one with the, ugly writing. That's what I'm actually here for. And really confused the librarians. Probably my favorite little anecdote he shared at the beginning, though, was when he was trying to explain to one of the librarians about the fact why the book was defaced the way it was in that area. He mentioned that with the Reformation, very early in the Reformation, Tudor era, the books were being defaced by the Protestants. And she was very miffed when he explained that to him and was like, well, I hope that was their book and it wasn't from a library. It was just like a librarian offended by the possibility of a library book being defaced across the ages. So that amused me. Now, I found the point where it starts in Tudor era, so it does that with Thomas More's Psalter. So I marked that off so I can focus on reading the ones for the Middle Ages during what remains of this quarter. And I'm not very far along, but it is interesting so far. It's going through right now the kind of prayers that might be in somebody's Book of Hours at that era. It's not quite the same as the Liturgy of the Hours book that is used for even among the laity today. Right now, the laity's Book of Hours, Liturgy of the Hours, is the same as what the priests use, their breviary. But back then, it wasn't. Whereas the monks had what seems to be very similar to the breviary today, but they also would have the Office of the Dead, which you can still pray today within the breviary, and also the Little Office of the Blessed Virgin Mary, which is something separate today. Apparently what the Psalter would include or what the Book of Hours would include for the lay people would be like you'd have the Office of the Dead, the Little Office of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and a couple of other prayers that they could say throughout the day. So, and for the Little Office of the Blessed Virgin Mary, if I recall, it's morning prayer, evening prayer, night prayer. It's been a very long time since I've used the Little Office of the Blessed Virgin Mary because I generally just do the breviary / Liturgy of the Hours, Divine Office. It's called several different things. But yeah, it was interesting to see that it's not quite what I thought it was. I had equated it to what would be the Liturgy of the Hours book today. It's not quite the same, which explains why there's a lot more room for the pictures that are there. And I could see why then, if they were related to the texts, why that wouldn't seem to match up with what I would expect to see in a Liturgy of the Hours book. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. I look forward to seeing what else I'll learn from this and what sort of writings are in there and what it would tell us about lay people who prayed using these books. And what's nice about these books is these probably were actually used by the recipients versus simply being like status symbols. It seems like these were more likely to actually see use, which is kind of cool. The other one that I just started today, this is the Lindisfarne Gospels. And I'm probably mispronouncing that. I don't think I've ever actually heard it pronounced. Society, Spirituality, and the Scribe. Another Michelle P. Brown book. Now, she does recommend for anyone who doesn't understand any of the terminology that she has here, she recommends a couple of her other books as reference point, one of which is this one. So, conveniently, I already have this. Another one she has is a book on illuminated manuscripts and another book on terminology, both of which I have as something that I want to get in the future. We'll see if I actually need those at this time. But not terribly far along. The first, good from here to here is all pictures. And what's cool is I have a light at my desk that I think I got it with the intention to be able to do some close work without, bending my head too much. Just because I've had surgery back here in the past and I'm not supposed to move it probably as much as I do. But it was a tried attempt to be able to do crafting while looking through it. Now, I've not found that to be something that's convenient to me, but with that the huge magnifying glass that's on there with the light ring on that, it has proven to be very convenient in getting a closer look at some of these pictures where you can see the animals that are twisted in words or just in some of the decorations on here. So it's kind of nice to have that built-in magnifying glass / light on my desk to do that. And I'm interested in seeing what this tells me about some of those creatures and maybe what some of the symbolism, what I might be looking at. So this is a thick book. Hopefully I'll be able to finish it before the end of the quarter. But I really wanted to start this because anytime you talk about anything illuminated manuscripts during the medieval times, not any that would have been like Tudor era, although there were fewer during that era, the Lindisfarne Gospels always come up, as do the Book of Kells, but it seems like again and again and again the Lindisfarne Gospels come up. So I'm really interested in learning more about them and just everything related to the world around them, because it sounds like she goes much into more detail. That doesn't seem to make sense. She goes into a lot of detail, including things about the world in relation to these Gospels. Okay, I feel like this video has been very disjointed. Oh, hey, I want to show, actually, my other medieval animal bookmarks. So that's a cow reading. I kind of feel like they just were imitating those works. I don't believe I've ever seen animals with books on the margins. This feels like it could possibly be something like they would have actually seen. I'm not sure if that's original art or not. There's some cats. And I have one in here. At least one in here. Yeah, just one in here. Where is it? And this is like this weird snail woman thing. So yeah, there's that. This is very disjointed. I'll have to edit this most likely. Actually, I'm definitely going to edit this because I have weird pauses in places. Yeah.
hope you get something out of this. I just feel like I'm all over the place.
Thank you very much for joining me today. Hope that you have a blessed day, and I will see you again next time. God bless. Bye-bye.